Hello everybody, this is a video to accompany Mach1 Spatial template for Bitwig. It focuses on a running template example in order to mix spatial audio in Bitwig, which is only a stereo, not multi-channel DAW, but with some workarounds. I'll attempt to explain how it is possible. You've either arrived here through the wonders of the interweb or from Mach1 Spatial, but either way, this video serves the purpose to describe mixing Mach1 Spatial 8-channel system in Bitwig. If you've seen any previous videos, you'll be aware I've explored quite a few approaches to working in a stereo DAW from multi-channel Mach1 Spatial, which is always a challenge, simply not because of Mach1 Spatial, but not really using the DAW for the job. But if you really like Bitwig and, like myself, you want to kind of combine the entire mixing and spatial workflow in parallel with each other, then I think this is a useful creative approach. Traditionally, you would get your stems in stereo and then spatial mix them as a separate mix, but I'm trying to come at it from sound creation kind of angle, where you're going to be creating the sound and mixing it spatially all at the same time. And Bitwig's a pretty damn good DAW for sound design and for music as well. So with that said, I think this is probably the simplest way to go about it in Bitwig, and I've certainly managed to work out what the most efficient way is in terms of the DSP, because when you're working in spatial audio, you're using a lot more channels of audio, potentially all routing down to what you can hear out of your headphones. I'd recommend you wear headphones for this tutorial, purely because the monitor for Mach1 Spatial is running on this template, and lends itself to headphones, but it should sound fine on stereo speakers as well. So essentially, I've removed the whole idea of 8 sort of channels per track, and I'm now just using what's called hybrid tracks, purely because you can use MIDI or audio in them. And I've created 32 of them. I've disabled a lot because I'm just not going to need them, and there is a little bit of resource used, because each one does have a VST in. It actually has Krushview Element hosting the Mach1 Panner. I'll explain why. If you've watched previous videos, you'll know why, but essentially it's just to make the multi-channel side simpler, because Bitwig gets a little bit confused over should it be outputting stereo pairs or sort of mono pairs stereo or just mono. And Bitwig doesn't really easily support mono. If you want to work in mono, you always have to split stereo, which is a bit unfortunate, but It's just the way it's designed. So 32 channels should be enough for most projects, and this bleepy sound in the background is just a modulating test tone I'm using, just so that when you open this template up, something is heard if it's working. So we don't use any of the Bitwig output routing here. It's all handled with audio receivers, but we run Krushview Element, which is taking the stereo output of this test tone, and that enters Krushview Element, which has its own kind of input and output channels, basically, and within Krushview Element you can host plugins. So just like any VST host, it just links to your VST plugins folder. And so we've got a Mach1 Spatial Panner running. The X, Y elevation and spread are all linked to these 4 controller parameters here, because the panner's hosted. If you wanted to modulate or automate any of this from Bitwig, you can't go straight to these parameters because it's within Krushview. So basically you map from the plugin to Krushview, and then from Krushview you can then modulate. And what I've done is I've just added three modulators: an XY modulator, which basically controls the X and the Y, and that allows you to pan without having to keep opening Krushview all the time. So obviously if you wanted to do some very detailed control, you'd want the panner open, but a lot of the time you'll just have this closed. If I just turn this up a little bit. So if you imagine this center point is you listening, then you can move around, and that is literally just controlling the panner here. Obviously if we go right to the corners, you can confirm that the mapping is calibrated. If it gets out of sync, which it sometimes can, if you just drag everything to the bottom left corner, and the bottom left corner in the panner, it kind of recalibrates. It is kind of the extremities of the values are set up here actually, or X and Y, but it's essentially just mapped directly. And then there's the elevation control, which is just a macro control, and the stereo spread. Obviously, generally in Bitwig, it's always going to be a Mach1 stereo panner, although Mach1 it does offer single channel stereo quad 6 output, sorry, 6 input, but generally your sound source is mono or stereo. Certainly in Bitwig it will be anyway. So that's the panner. So every track I've set one of these panners up with the XY control all the way to 32. the Krushview handles the output kind of chains. So these 8 outputs here are being paired together because Bitwig needs to work with at least dual mono, which is kind of being carried in the stereo channel, I guess. And that's where that audio journey ends. So as you pan, you'll see if I pan over to the right, these levels are up on the right, not on the left, and then over to the left, vice versa. Then up and down, you can see how the panning works. So that audio ends there. Ignore, as I said before, there's no output from this track. There is output, but it is ending in this device chain. It can't go anywhere because I haven't selected it to go anywhere, and that's by design, on purpose, because every single track routes to this Mach1 Spatial group of tracks here, and this will represent and operate as your Mach1 Spatial 8 channels. It's split into the top 4 channels and the bottom 4 channels. This is purely because Bitwig's going to export in pairs, so it will be left and right, top, front, left and right, top, rear, bottom left and right, front, bottom left and right, rear. I have set these because they're in a group. They are routing to this group track here, but I've only done that purely because you can see the levels when I do that. So it's quite useful if you're just trying to work out maybe why some audio's not coming through. Can be a good indicator. Right, in each of these stereo pairs, there is an audio receiver running in an effects layer. The effects layer is just a way to group multiple effects in parallel, basically. So like you just stack in a load of audio receivers, so they're all running in parallel. You can see we've got a signal on track 1 because that's where the sound's coming from. That track's audio is being pulled in by this audio receiver because on track 1, element effects, which is the Krushview output, we're selecting these post outs from the chains, and so this kind of replaces having to put 4 tracks per track to emulate the 8 channels. As it's in a template, you're not going to have to really worry about this because it's just going to work. But just so I can explain how it works, so the first channels 1 and 2 are coming into the audio receiver. Then there's a source effects with that, which is where you could apply insert effects to that track. Send effects are a bit of a nightmare in in a stereo DAW when you want them to be multi-channel, because you can't just twiddle a send knob to send the to send a portion of the audio to the effects. We'll come on to this a bit later. So essentially, channels 1 and 2 out the panner of track 1 go there, and then channels 3 and 4 also. So in this track there's another 31 slots in the FX layer. 3 and 4 comes in there. Same for 5 and 6, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. So we're just sending stereo pairs to this Mach1 Spatial kind of pseudo bus, but this is all running within Bitwig. There's no, if I show you the routing, if you've watched previous videos, you'll be aware that we kind of worked around a lot of this using jack and kind of loop back in the audio out of the tracks and back into a bus, pseudo bus. But there's no routing here. I'm just taking the stereo out, which is coming from the Mach1 Spatial VST, which I'll come on to as well towards the end. And it goes on like that. So channel track 2 obviously has its 4 stereo pairs, just like track 1, and on the Mach1 Spatial bus, track 2 gets the post audio channels 1 to 2, then we get 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. Everything is essentially routing into these effects layers on each of these stereo tracks. And even though they're stereo tracks, they're taking the kind of the individual mono signal that is coming out of the panner. So it is literally these first 2 are a pair, second 2, third 2, fourth 2. So that's the routing of that. On track 2, I haven't got any source effects like track 1. Track 1 is purely to demonstrate how you could apply effects. So much of how you're going to use effects is down to what you want to do in terms of realism and spatial kind of 3D feel and stuff. There's no real right way. I've actually just included an example using Bitwig's built-in convolution reverb, which I'll come on to as well shortly. So that's our main stereo to panner, 8 channels to Mach1 Spatial bus, and that bus, this bus here, when you finished your piece of music, you'll export the audio and you will select those channels, and that will become your Mach1 Spatial kind of master file, which you'll then take on to the Mach1 Spatial transcoder. So we'll do that a little bit later as well. Right. I'll show the kind of the master out, which is similar to or will be familiar to anyone that's used Bitwig in a stereo sense. So again, there's an effects layer on the first device, Again, we've got audio receivers. First audio receiver is dealing with the top channels 1 to 4. In it, you can see that it's taking this top post signal from this track here, and this track, this track, and this track, because these are holding the summed audio of all tracks above that have got Panner on them. The lower channels are working exactly the same way. If we just show you the monitor, so as you might be aware of, in Bitwig you can take a stereo channel in as the main audio into a VST, and then if the VST supports it, you can bring in another stereo pair as a side chain input. So essentially you've got 4-channel input, kind of like quad multi-channel in a way. And so if we take this top set of channels 1 and 2 are coming in from the Mach1 Spatial bus. Then on the source effects, which is our Mach1 Monitor, we've got the side chain taking the 3 and 4. So top post here, which is this channel here, and then exactly the same happens for the lower. So there's two monitors, because we can't do 8 channels in one go, so we have to split it, top half, bottom half. Essentially these just sit there. If you wanted to change how you monitor, you can select the monitor mode here. Most of the time you'll be on the default one, so you can largely just ignore this. So those 8 channels merged and summed down. I've included spectrum analyzer just to show that stuff's happening and what you're dealing with, and then there's a peak limiter just to protect yourself. You might want to lower that even more, but for this demonstration it's fine. And yeah, obviously this output here is what's entering OBS that you can hear in the background. And if you wanted to release or distribute that, then obviously that master output is also exportable. Can't remember how you actually get it up. I guess you'd have to. I'm not sure why that doesn't show. Not sure if you have to go off the master up there, maybe. I can't remember exactly how that works. If not, you'd have to kind of, it's probably because we haven't got an input on here, but you could take create another stereo channel with an audio receiver, and then you'll have a track with that master audio on it. Right, let's get onto the effects. So back to track 1. There's some reverb you can hear on the background. Now you can't use ascend that you'd normally use. In fact, I've removed the default effects slot entirely, because there's no point in sending a stereo send and trying to reflect what's happening in this panner. Obviously, if I pan to the left, or if I pan to the back of the room, no reverb's ever going to get into a stereo reverb, or sorry, into a multi-channel reverb from a stereo source, because that's more like just panning to to minus infinity. There's no amplitude there to apply the reverb to. So this isn't a perfect way to do reverb, but I wanted to include something that would work out of the box in Bitwig, and from the last 2 or 3 versions of Bitwig, they include a convolution reverb, and coming back to the Mach1 Spatial bus, which has slots for every 32 tracks, I've put an instance of the convolution reverb on. So there's one on channels 1 and 2, which is the kind of the top left and right. On channel 3 and 4, another one. Channel 5 and 6, another one. And channels 7 and 8, another one. So there's kind of each corner of the room of the Mach1 Spatial kind of cube. Each corner has essentially a convolution reverb running as a stereo kind of left-right pair, and that works quite well. If I just gain this up a little bit. Sometimes you can't just turn stuff off, but if I turn each convolution off, so you can hear how that's getting applied. Obviously, a lot comes in on the 1 and 2, which kind of correlates more to just a stereo. Oh, what am I doing? I'm not soloing there. I need to undo it here. There's various techniques you can look up on how to simulate immersive kind of reverb. All I've done in this template is the top of the room, I've made the reverb kind of brighter, and then the bottom made it a bit darker sounding. That just helps when you're using the elevation on the panner. It just feels like the sound's kind of going up slightly. And then on the rear stereo pairs, which is 3 and 4 and 7 and 8, I'm just adding a pre-delay, which is the pre-delay is the time before the incoming signal reaches the convolution. So it's simulating what you would do in like a cascading kind of reverb sense, where you want the reverb reflection to come slightly later to represent distance further away from the sound. You can play around with this. It's actually the convolution reverb. It's a 4-channel impulse response. So that's kind of like the left and the right of the left, the left and the right of the right kind of stereo response. But we're controlling width, even the tune and the brightness and the pre-delay, and even the start and the stop of the reverb. You've actually got quite a tight little reverb where you can really tweak quite a lot. You've also got wet effects chain here, and the wet effects allows you to apply further effects on the convolution, so that it's effects for the wet signal basically. I haven't really played with it that much, but you can imagine, especially with you know, the modulation ability you got in Bitwig, there's so much you could do. I mean, you could not that you use random specifically, but it's an easy one to demonstrate. You could have a say a delay. You could put a delay on. Not sure how much you're going to hear that, but you get the idea. You can modulate something in this delay based on whatever's happening in the track. You might need to play around with that a little bit more. I would have thought that would have made more difference. Anyway, let me just delete this. So yeah, so that gives you something to play with that doesn't need you to download a quadraphonic reverb or anything like that. It's kind of working like a quadraphonic in some sense. And I think when you're panning around, it's not too bad. Like, it doesn't feel like the sound is alien to the sort of spatial sense in the reverb. And I think with some more decorrelation, perhaps you could get pretty close to more advanced reverbs like cinematic rooms in a simplified sort of sense. Right, yeah, that's pretty much it. Obviously, to export a project as Mach1 Spatial, export audio, choose your Mach1 Spatial channels. Pre-fader, I'd actually use post-fader on this because those effects are being applied after here. So make sure that's off in this template. In the previous videos, that didn't matter so much because the reverb was being handled differently. Yeah, and then you'll just export that. Export. And there's your files. There's other files in here because they were named differently. But yeah, these are they're from the previous template. Yeah, so you got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and from there merge them together. Quite critical is on these tracks here. We're going to mix view. I'm not sure where they are. Not sure if I can get some. Yeah, do not adjust the panners or the levels. Everything level should be at unity, and you don't want to pan anything because this, even though the audio is within the stereo pairs, it's really two mono signals. So you want those left alone. hopefully some point Bitwig will let you work in purely on mono channel, but for now it is what it is. I'm not sure exactly how Bitwig's panning works internally, but I assume it's the equivalent of kind of a hard left and right pan on a traditional mixer, even though it's represented as just a left and right knob on the GUI. Right, we're done. Hopefully that explains things. My email address is in the template if you want any more advice, or best probably to leave comments below, and then everybody can follow. But I think this is the best template for now. I've been working on this a little while, and I think certainly it's the most efficient in terms of DSP. When you create lots of tracks within tracks, this DSP generally does go up quite a lot, whereas this alternative way of just using audio receivers seems to be a lot less resource hungry, which is good. Anyway, that's it. Cheerio. Take care.